What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Metal Ledger. If this is your first time here, my name is James, and this is a podcast where we talk about metal news, new releases, and sometimes we just zone out and talk about a genre as a whole. Today is another episode where I'm doing this all solo, just because I don't think I need an extra co-host for this topic, and this is a very big one. I wanted to tackle something that I think a lot of people either get intimidated by or feel like they've missed the boat on, and that's honestly just the history of heavy metal. Metal can feel overwhelming. There's millions of subgenres, everyone has opinions, and sometimes it feels like if you weren't there at the beginning, you're already behind. I felt this way coming into metal as someone who came in around like the 2012-ish mark where like crabcore was, the most popular at the time. This episode is not about being a historian or naming every band that ever existed. This is about giving you a clear path through the genre. If you're brand new into metal, this episode is your starting point. If you've been listening for years, this is a chance for you to revisit how we all got to what we consider heavy modern metal. I'll be walking through the major eras of metal, how they sounded, and why they mattered. And I'll give you one song per era that you can use as a reference point. I'll also touch on guitar tunings, not in a technical way, but in a way of like, why did this make the music sound heavier kind of way? Anyways, let's go back in time. And so we start at the birthplace of heavy metal, which would be the late 60s into the 70s. Before metal was even a word people used, it was really just heavy rock bands pushing further than what was considered normal at their time. Rock music in the late 60s was already experimenting with a lot of distortion and volume, but metal took that and added something darker. A lot of the big things that I wouldn't say that I understand, but I know about early metal is that it was really about vibe and atmosphere, not aggression. Songs were slower, the riffs were simple but massive, lyrics leaned kind of into a theme that felt uncomfortable compared to like the peace and love era happening around it. Black Sabbath comes to mind when you're looking at a cornerstone here. When they showed up, they didn't sound like anybody else. Their music felt ominous and unsettling, and it was new. From a tuning standpoint, most of this era lived in a standard tuning. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't like your drop D or drop E. It was literally just the same tuning. It was just E. It was just a standard E tuning that most bands were using at that time. The heaviest came from the heaviness. I'm so sorry. The heaviness came from how riffs were written, honestly. Not how low they were tuned, but Tony Iommi's playing style, if you actually look at it, was influenced by a finger injury he had, which honestly led him to have more repetitive riffs and led to thicker, harder-hitting, flashy playing that, was pretty much Tony Iommi's style. It was very physical and very demanding of him. A lot of people today, if they hear Black Sabbath and they think it sounds tame, but context really does matter and a standpoint that comes with talking about Black Sabbath, because you have to think like nowadays we have crazy distortion and gutturals, Will Ramos. If we took Will Ramos and put him in the 1960s and let him do metal vocals, I guarantee that they would crucify him and say he's the devil. Like back then, dude, I don't think they even could imagine someone's voice being able to put out the noises that like Alex Terrible does, or Will Ramos, or the lead singer of Infant Annihilator. Any of them back in the day it wouldn't have felt real to them. Nothing would have been the same. Though, moving on, if you would want a starting point for this era, I would say I would probably listen to the song... God, man. I would probably listen to the song Paranoid by Black Sabbath. Honestly, I would listen to the entire Paranoid album. I'm going to be real. That entire album has a lot of very, very good songs. You have War Pigs, you got Paranoid, you have Iron Man, The Hand of Doom, a lot of really, really good songs. And that entire album is really just like a staple point for like a blueprint to heavy metal, because at most of everything after this was just people taking Black Sabbath's blueprint and then adding their own little mix to it to make them sound different, but still giving the blueprints. I don't even know how to even say that really. I would say most bands took their formula, and it was kind of like, it's kind of like, hey man, I forgot to do my homework last night. Can I copy yours? And your friend goes, hey man, yeah, you can copy it. Just change it a little bit. Make it your own. But at the end of this era matters because without Black Sabbath and the couple other bands like Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple that came out of the late 60s going into the 70s, it was the blueprint that we can trace all the way back, even with today's modern metal. As metal moved into the late 70s and early 80s, we came into an era that is mostly known as the new wave of British heavy metal era. Bunches of bands from Britain were all hearing, the American heavy metal scene that, Black Sabbath took and absolutely twisted and was like, hey, look at this stuff. And they saw the blueprint and they were like, hey, if they can do it, we can do it. So into the late 70s and the early 80s, it began to fully spread from rock music, and this is where metal becomes its own culture. Bands like Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Dio, and Saxon defined the sound and image of metal. The music became faster and more precise, vocals became higher and more dramatic, and I mean, I'm talking very high vocals. If you go and listen to Judas Priest, for example, a lot of their songs he is singing in a higher key. Guitar solos were no longer optional and they were expected. With most modern metal, like today's metal, you don't see a lot of flashy guitar solos. Now, obviously, there's bands like Rings of Saturn and like Born of Osiris. They're extremely heavy, and they do include a lot of solos, and same with like Lorna Shore. They have them, but most of the metal scene doesn't really have a lot of guitar solos in it, and it really does show. The era also introduced the idea that metal could be anthemic, which means songs were more built for crowds and for fists in the air and a lot of chanting along. A good song for this would be Breaking the Law by Judas Priest, where most of the time at the concerts, everyone is chanting the line that is repeated. I think I counted it 14 times. It is just him screaming, breaking the law, and normally everyone is absolutely destroying that song by shouting it. The tuning-wise, I would say most of the bands I'm pretty sure I looked into are all still playing in E standard, but some started experimenting with some down-tuning E standard. You would strip like a half step down. This gave the music a slightly darker tone without losing its clarity. Kind of actually like the song Breaking the Law. It's very simple, it's aggressive, and it's instantly recognizable. You can play the first 4 notes of that song, and most people who are metalheads will be like, hey, that's Judas Priest. And this era really solidified metal's identity and proved that it wasn't just a little phase anymore. Most people thought that Black Sabbath was going to be here, there, and done within the span of about a 5 or 10 year span, but with bands coming out with the new wave of British heavy metal and European heavy metal coming out, it really showed that people were listening to it and it wasn't just a phase. This is kind of where you're going to see a lot of bands and genres splitting at this point. It's no longer rock and roll and heavy rock and metal all in one category. Metal at this point has now split, and now metal's going to start getting its own subgenres of metal. And the first subgenre that I can think of is us right now going into the next actual chapter of this video is going to be, I think, one of the first subgenres of metal that I can think of. Going into the next era of metal is definitely where metal stops walking and really starts sprinting, like full run. By the early 1980s, the groundwork had been laid, and metal knew what it really was, and it took a look and sound and a growing global audience, but a new generation of musicians felt something was missing, and to them, traditional heavy metal still felt slow, a little bit too polished, and too safe. And they just wanted urgency. And this is where the new wave of British heavy metal really started taking off. Yeah, from here on out, I will be referring to the new wave of British heavy metal as NWOBHM. It wasn't a single sound. It was more of a movement because they didn't want perfection anymore. A lot of the new wave, NWOBHM was mostly energy, speed, and momentum. Iron Maiden is one of the most important bands to come out of that movement, in my own accord, and most of the internet's probably going to be agreeing with me here. They expanded metal's musical vocabulary without sacrificing any of the heavy-sounding, galloping bass lines and any of like the harmonized guitar leads that most people fell in love with. Iron Maiden proved that metal could be epic, and a lot of people would take that genre and just run with that one too, and we'll speak about that here in a minute. Songs weren't just about darkness anymore. When thrash and NWOBHM came around to like a full swing, a lot of bands made it about history, about wars. Some of it was mythology, and some of it was like internal struggles, where metal started to feel more cinematic. A band that really stands out during this is Motorhead. They didn't fit neatly into the NWOBHM label. Lemmy famously one time said that Motorhead was just rock and roll, just a little louder and a little faster. But that speed and aggression is one of the things that I think directly inspired what came next, and it was the laying ground point to thrash metal. Thrash metal was a reaction to commercial rock. It was a reaction to glam metal, if you would. Pretty much it was never meant to feel soft or anything. Thrash was aggressive, political, and unrelenting. The riffs got faster, and drums became more complex, and down picking became law. Big bands that I would say would definitely stand out here would be Metallica. I'd say Slayer you can throw into that box. Anthrax for sure. And what would be the other mega band from back then? Megadeth, which, by the way, Megadeth is releasing their final album and is on a farewell tour. Each approached thrash a little differently. Metallica focused on structure and melody, while bands like Slayer leaned more into a chaotic and brutal kind of sound. And if you want to know what I mean by chaotic and brutal, go listen to Raining Blood by Slayer. You'll fully understand that. Megadeth brought like a technical precision, and Anthrax injected just like really strong punk attitude that was something that was missing and a lot of people were looking for. From a tuning standpoint, most thrash bands stayed in like a standard tuning or drop a half step and drop like a half step drop E. The heaviest didn't come from pitch, and just like the other ones, a lot of the time it came from like a speed and precision standpoint. The tightness mattered a little more than thickness, but with this era, it also marked a massive shift in drumming where double bass drums became a common thing and tempos increased. And the metal genre as a community in a whole began demanding athleticism from musicians. And I'd say if you want to explore more of what this like era was, I would probably just go and listen to the Master of Puppets by Metallica. And honestly, I would probably say, what's another song from them that you could throw in there? Man, honestly, just listen to like the whole Master of Puppets album, because it has songs like Battery on it, Welcome Home, and obviously Master of Puppets is on there, and Damage Inc. All great songs to listen to. Master of Puppets really stands out as a masterclass in balance. It's got a lot of aggressive without being sloppy, and it's a little complex with being inaccessible, with heavy without being mindless. And for first-time listeners, this era shows a lot of the time that metal's more disciplined and it was more anger with a purpose. And leading on from there, this is really where metal would cross a line and never really look back. Going into the late 80s, into the early 90s, thrash had pushed speed and aggression close to their limits most of the time. And for some musicians, it still wasn't enough, funny enough. And they wanted metal to sound dangerous, not just fast and not just heavy, but genuinely unsettling. So a subgenre that is going to pop up here is called extreme metal. And it wasn't really about popularity to them. It was about accessibility, and it was about expressing emotions to the furthest point. Death metal first emerges somewhere around here, rooted with thrash metal, but stipends and restraints guitar to become more complex, and vocals dropped into guttural growls that most people are used to with modern metal nowadays. And the drumming became relentless. Bands like Morbid Angel and Cannibal Corpse come to mind, and they weren't really trying to scare people. They were more just trying to push the boundaries of technical ability. And you can see a lot of technical ability explode during this era, becoming intricate and demanding more real concentration from both musicians and listeners. Chuck of Death, which is one of the more important figures in metal history, he proves that extreme metal it was intelligent and emotional and progressive. And at the same time, black metal was forming in Europe, particularly Norway of all places. Gotta love some Norwegian black metal. As a complete rejection of polish, where metal was while death metal was pursuing precision, black metal was more pursuing an atmosphere. It was more raw production and screeching vocals. Guitars were more like a tremolo pick, and blast beats that felt endless. And I'm talking blast beats. If you want like a good example of blast beats, just go and look at the Cunt Crusher song from Infinite Annihilator and watch the drum playthrough. It's the most crazy thing ever to me. I could never imagine being able to play that fast. Black metal wasn't about sounding good. It was more about sounding cold. And this era really marked the true beginning of down tuning as a defining element for guitars. As from here, it went from a standard E or like a half step down of E tuning, and we started seeing D tuning or even C tuning. The goal was the thickness of the chords, a little heavier weight, and it made the notes sound a lot more dense. The production choice mattered as just as much as the tuning did. I would say a lot of it was murky, reverb-heavy drums, and intentionally thin guitar tones created a very, I've used this word a lot earlier, but very oppressive. It was like an oppressive soundscape. I would say if you want a really, really great song for this era, I would probably say Crystal Mountain by Death. I've listened to it like once or twice. It is on my playlist. It showcases extreme metal and melody in like a really brutal sound, but it's expressing them in being able to exist in the same exact soundscape that wasn't really around back then. For new listeners of metal, even myself being someone who's a little more experienced, I don't really like this genre of metal. Like, extreme metal I don't listen to it very often. It's there on some of my playlists, but I don't listen to it a bunch. It was really just exploring the limits emotionally and seeing how far they could push it. And coming into the late 1990s, going into the early 2000s, we have one of my favorites genres, and we are hitting the new metal and alternative metal scene. This is where the community kind of got split down the line. By the late 90s, I think it was about the late 90s. I think it was like 97 or 98. Extreme metal had pushed the genre to a technical and emotional extreme, and emerging on the other side was new metal. It was a reaction of mainstream rock with some like new metal kind of like twisted in there. It was instead of it being like a complexity, new metal focused more on groove, and they really focused on rhythm instead of solos. It leaned more on personal pain and alienation and anger instead of like history, war, and the stuff that was the last couple eras that really, like, Iron Maiden and stuff like that. They weren't focused on anything crazy like that anymore. It was personally about pain, alienation, and anger. Bands of this area, I would say Korn is definitely like the number one. Korn, when it came out, was kind of, I don't even know how to say it. Like, Korn was kind of like an overnight thing, and I'm not gonna lie. 7-string guitars became very common. Tunings dropped dramatically, and often they went to A or lower. The lower ended dominated the mix normally. Riffs became percussive. Guitars functioned almost like drums. Other bands of this would be like Deftones, which brought more of an atmosphere and vulnerability to the genre. And another big hitter is Limp Bizkit, brought more aggression and attitude. If you want like a really good Limp Bizkit song, just go like listen to Break Stuff. It's exactly this genre, literally. Break Stuff is a perfect point of the genre. Another big band from this era is definitely Linkin Park, which blended metal with like more electronics and emotional storytelling. This era, I would say, is deeply visual. This is where music videos really started to matter. Like MTV starting to pop up. If you have a music video, you better hope that MTV reaches out and goes, "Hey, we want to play it on our channel," because at some point, I know MTV's gone now, being the big 2026, but back in the day, all they played was music videos and music. There wasn't like dumb TV shows like Teen Mom and stuff like that. It was actually, just metal. Critics often dismiss new metal as simplistic, but its impact is very undeniable. It really brought metal to an early new audience. And I would say if you're interested in the new metal or alternative scene, possibly, I would say go listen to anything from Korn, like Freak on a Leash. Freak on a Leash is a great song. What's some other ones? You can go Linkin Park. If you go to Linkin Park, what's the album called? Give me 1 second here. I'm looking it up. Matoria. Listen to Matoria. Just listen to that whole fucking album. Just do it. It's definitely worth listening to that album. Back to Freak on a Leash by Korn. The songs got like a quiet, loud dynamic. It's down-tuned groove, and its raw vocal delivery pretty much perfectly captures the spirit of the era. For new listeners, I would say this area can feel kind of immediate and emotional, but you don't need to understand metal's history to feel it. You understand where they're coming from. A lot of it's a lot of personal things. This is more of like metal connecting to raw emotions and how you're feeling. I have a playlist of metal from this era for when I'm feeling a little upset or a little angry, so I fully understand, where they were coming from. They were expressing their own emotions so that they didn't blow up. With us going through the new metal genre, we are now into the 2000s and 2010s, and this is where we're going to start hitting our more modern day metal. As new metal faded, a new generation was definitely taking over. It was more of like a hardcore punk aggression with thrash's precision, and it kind of just dumped what most would call metalcore on everyone's face. Metalcore is still in 2026 one of the most popular genres of metal. Metalcore, deathcore. You make a genre, put core after it, people are listening to it. They don't care. Since it became one of the dominant forces, it introduced a contrast of defining features like harsh vocals paired with a clean chorus, lots of blast beats followed by breakdowns, and a lot of melodic chords being followed by very fast, chaotic melodies. Bands like Killswitch Engaged, Bring Me the Horizon, The Architects, they are some of the biggest defining artists of this era. I would say Killswitch Engaged, go listen to My Curse. Bring Me the Horizon with Suicide. I would say Bring Me the Horizon, I would probably just go and listen to the entire Suicide Season album. It's dead in the middle of this genre, and it really does speak for itself. At the time when modern metal started coming out, production became pretty pristine. There was no more like one band sounding really good and then one band was on a different label or something, and it's got like a little staticky background. That no longer happens after this point. Some of these bands were recording in their garage on their little shitty Mac laptops, and with a couple presses of a button, these guys were getting perfectly clear audio quality. Most of the tuning in this era, I would say a lot of it's drop C and drop B tuning, which is just extending. It's just an extended range that guitars became like 6 and 7 string guitars are very normal in this era, and here soon we're gonna start seeing a lot of drop E tuning and drop D tuning. Some of these bands are also using drop F, if you would believe it. But this genre, I would say, blends a lot of aggression with accessibility, and the heaviness, it seems like there's hope on the other side. For new listeners, I would say this era shows that metal can be emotional without losing its power. It's very, I wouldn't say it's niche anymore. With modern metal, there's definitely a band for everybody at that point. Going into the 2010s, you can listen to anything from, metalcore, deathcore's popping up. You got other bands like Volumes and The Contortionists. Another great one is Periphery. You have all these bands. Even Amir's popping up here. And, there's definitely a sound for everybody. Like Contortionists are more progressive prog. And then, you have Volumes, which is mixing harsh vocals with very melodic singing. Very, very painful. Like their entire Views album is really emotional and really explains a lot. But moving on, we are in the last era of metal now. This is the 2015 to the present age. This is the era that most people call the internet metal era or the post-genre metal era. This is an era where metal completely breaks free from its own past. If every previous era of metal was defined by a reaction to the one before it, this era is defined by something completely different. It's really just expressive freedom. Freedom from genre rules, freedom from labels, and freedom from geography. Freedom from the gatekeepers at this point. This is the first time in metal history where there is no single dominant sound and that there's no weakness to that point. To understand modern metal, you have to really understand the internet. Before this era, metal scenes were local. You discovered bands through recording stores, record stores. Sorry, that's my bad. I actually said recording stores. Magazines, and most of the time you saw them on TV. Or you had your friends bring over a little mixed DVD or CD they got from a concert they just went to locally, and it had a bunch of bands on it. Discovery is kind of instant and global. A band can upload a song today and be heard around the world by the end of the day. And this completely changes how metal evolves. Genres no longer grow slowly. They mutate rapidly, and bands aren't locked into scenes. They're influenced by everything all at once at this point. This is why modern metal feels a little chaotic if you're trying to categorize it. One of the most important developments of this era is the term djent. And djent is spelled with a D in front of it. It's D-J-E-N-T, djent. Not as a genre per se, but as a technique. Polyrhythmic riffs, palm-muted chugs, syncopation, and machine-like precision became the foundation of many modern metal bands. Bands like Periphery and Tesseract, Meshuggah. Meshuggah's not like a newer band, but Meshuggah's in that list. Pushed rhythm to a forefront. The rift stopped being about melody first, and it really became about a groove, a timing, and a tension. This era also marked the normalization of extended guitar range with 7 and 8 and even 9-string guitars. They're no longer novelties at this point. They're tools. Tuning dropped to extremes like drop F and drop E. Open tuning designs, they're pretty much just open tuning designed around rhythm rather than a pitch. But here's the key difference that you're going to see compared to earlier down tuning eras. And it's modern metal isn't heavy just because it's low. It's heavy because it's precise. Technology plays a massive role here. Digital amps and amp modelers and home recording setups allow bands to achieve studio quality sound without ever stepping into a traditional solo. Bedroom producers became legitimate metal artists overnight. And one of the craziest ones you can look up is the band Periphery. On the main page for Periphery on YouTube, you can see Misha Mansour and Spencer Sotelo and everybody in an apartment recording an entire studio album, and then literally Misha mastering the whole thing from a laptop in a fucking bedroom, pretty much. It's kind of ridiculous. I would say this democratization of production reshaped metal sound. It's got clean mixes, massive low end, and surgical tightness for the most part. It really, since you're not spending money being in the studio all day, a lot of bands can record one take and go, well, it doesn't sound good in this area. I want to move this riff over here and then try to rewrite all this to make it sound better. Bands like Spirit Box reintroduced vulnerability into the heavy music without sacrificing brutality kind of scene. Courtney LaPlante's vocal approach shifting effortlessly between like a haunting clean and like very, very aggressive screams represents a modern metal perfectly. An anchor song, I would say, is just go with Spirit Box and just listen to High Roller. It really, I would say, it balances modern metal, and is in like an atmospheric, aggressive song, and it's very clear and intent. It's heavy without being noisy, and emotional without being, a little too soft. Another defining band of this era is one of my favorites, who is currently challenging the very idea of what metal is supposed to be. This band is Sleep Token. They are blending metal with R&B, a lot of pop, ambient noises, and worship-like dynamics. It's intimate, it's vulnerable, and it's all at once. Sleep Token didn't really blow up overnight. They had an album before, and then everyone kind of picked up on them randomly, and it started blowing up. On the other end of the spectrum, deathcore experienced a very big rebirth here. Bands like Lorna Shore took deathcore and expanded it into something cinematic and orchestrational. It's very dramatic, and they use it to build breakdowns driven into full scale emotional experiences. Vocals in this era reached new extremes, and techniques became even more refined, from the growls to your screams to pig squeals, all executed with precision and control. In this era, social media is taking a very, very big reshape on the metal culture, with TikTok and YouTube and Instagram being the biggest social media platforms currently available. It creates a new kind of metal fan, one who discovers metal through a clip rather than an album. Riffs become viral moments, and then the songs are rarely replayed to its full extent. This is a negative evolution, but it's simply different. Modern metal artists must think visually as well as sonically. A breakdown isn't just something you hear, it's something you watch. Another major shift in this era is diversity. With modern metal, it's more inclusive than ever. We have, full woman bands, we have LGBTQ plus bands and artists, and music from all over the world is shaping the sound of heavy metal, and it's no longer dominated by one look or one voice or one region. Bands like Ginger brought progressive groove metal from Eastern Europe into a global spotlight. They're like a blend of technical riffs with dynamic vocals, and it fits perfectly into this era. Boundaryless, they can do whatever they want, really. Lyrically, modern metal is kind of a deeply personal mental health, identity, trauma, self-reflection theme kind of thing going on. It can range from a million different things, and you really just have to listen to a little bit of it all to understand exactly where it's going. Another defining feature is blending metal with non-metal genres, like taking metal and putting it in with hip-hop and electronic music and pop structures, and I would say even jazz. Metal no longer asks, is it allowed? It just goes, can we put this in a song and make this actually feel correct? And for first-time listeners, this era can feel a little overwhelming, not because it's too heavy, but more because it's too open. There's no correct standpoint and no rule book, but that's the beauty of it. Metal of the modern era is not a destination. It's more of a process of who you're trying to figure out, you're trying to listen to. It's like a living, breathing ecosystem that evolves daily. The era is nowhere near finished, and we're still inside it. And for the first time in metal history, no one knows exactly where we're actually going to be going. With anything, deathcore could be the next progression, or we could go like Norwegian black metal. I mean, there's so many different subgenres at this point that I don't really think there will be another era, in my own personal words. I think at this point we are just in the modern living metal scene, and it's just going to infinitely evolve unless there's going to be a new genre of metal, like metal's going to split off and there'll be a whole new one. I don't know. It's kind of crazy because over the last 2 or 3 years, metal's made a very large resurgence because of bands like Lorna Shore, and the Russians just got on a massive metal scene because of bands like Slaughter to Prevail. It really shows that metal fans are out there, but now we're actually starting to see, more people openly being like, hey, yeah, I listen to metal and it's my main genre. I would say over the next couple years, we could see a very large explosion in the metal community of new people coming in and new bands popping up all over the place. Just like my last episode, the one before this, I interviewed a band that had just dropped their debut single, and in the first week, it had almost 50,000 views, which is absolutely bonkers to even think that something like that can even happen nowadays. If you were to be a new metal band back in the day and be like, hey, we already sold, 1,200 albums and it's our first week, people would be like, holy shit, like, you are massive. But in today's terms, 50,000 viewers when there's 3.5 billion people on the internet every day, it's so minuscule, but it still gives you the motivation that shows you, there are people out there that definitely want to listen to your music. All right, so if you've made it this far, first of all, seriously, thank you for listening to the entire podcast. This was kind of a longer one for a solo episode. It really wasn't meant to be background noise. This is more of a sit down, a lock in, and take the ride and, kind of question what kind of metal you're really trying to listen to. Metal's not just a genre, and it never has been. It's more of a reaction, and it's a response to the time that it was created in. From the early days where heaviness came from more of a mood and oppression and an attention area, all the way to today where there's no rules, and metal's just kind of pushing something at this point. Anything that you can think of, someone's made a metal version of it for you. What I hope you got from this episode isn't just a list of bands or eras, but more of an understanding that metal is consistently evolving because people are evolving. Every era we talked about came from someone feeling like something, they were feeling like what existed before wasn't enough anymore. And that's important, honestly, in a metal genre. Because if you're new to metal, I want you to know that there's really no right place to start, and there's no checklist at all. You don't have to listen to everything. You don't have to understand everything. Metal isn't about knowing, and it's about feeling for the most part. And if you've been here for years, maybe this episode reminded you why you fell in love with music in the first place. Maybe it's that first riff you heard when you were a kid, whether it be Slipknot or Tool or Metallica or something along those lines. The first song, it was something. It either made you, feel like someone's been through what you've been through, or, it lets you express your anger, or maybe it made you feel like you were being understood. And that's honestly, it's perfectly fine. Metal survives because it adapts, but it's also because it means something to the people who listen to it. It's more like we're keeping it alive because it's surviving. This episode was never about this era is better than that era. It was more to show how every phase, even through the controversial ones, pushed the genre forward in a way. Even the stuff you don't like probably made room for something that you do love later. And it's kind of beautiful. If you enjoyed the episode, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video, or subscribed, or shared this with someone that you know loves heavy metal. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please leave us a rating. It does help us out, and it does get us pushed. And as always, if you have any thoughts or favorite eras or bands that I didn't mention, or mention something like a metal band may have changed your life, drop that stuff in the comments, dude. I try to be around in my comments as much as possible during the in the afternoon once I'm off work, because normally I work Sundays. I get off at 5 p.m. and then normally I sit at home and I will watch all of the socials. So if you're commenting, I will more than likely get right back to you. Anyways, this is the Metal Ledger. I am James, and until next time, keep listening loud, keep an open mind, and remember, metal's not stuck in the past, it's still being written. Have a good day.